Hello, everyone, and happy FNA Friday. We've made it. It's Friday, and I hope everybody's looking forward to a great weekend. Today, for today's live discussion, we'll be speaking with Harry Mosier, the founder and president of the Reshoring Initiative. I'm Eric Klingerman, the publisher of Industrial Heating, Process Heating, Forge, Process Cooling magazines, all part of Business News Publishing, or B&P Media. Just a few housekeeping notes. If you have questions, it's really easy. You just kind of go down to the bottom of your screen and you'll see Q&A. We'll try to get to as many as we can. We've only got 30 minutes today and we've got a lot to cover. Before we get in depth with Harry, I'd like to share some a personal story with everybody out there. And when I found out that I would be interviewing Harry today, I did my research. I went online and I looked at everything that the Reshoring Initiative is up to these days and what they're trying to do. And it really hit home with me personally, and I think it will also for Industrial Heating's readers and MTI's members. Harry started this initiative back in 2010, so it's not like it just happened all of a sudden. And it wasn't until recently, in light of the COVID-19 world pandemic, that we found out here in the United States how reliant we were on products and materials from foreign countries. This has only highlighted the importance of Harry's work. I could tell you, I'm a fifth-generation steelworker from Ohio, and I've seen 5 generations thrive and then lose their jobs over time. And quite frankly, bringing back U.S. manufacturing only helps provide more opportunities for our youth to provide good livelihoods for their families. So to start today's live session, I'd like to announce something. Industrial Heating and B&P Media will be supporting and sponsoring the Reshoring Initiative at the steel level, which is $2,500. And with this new relationship, you'll be hearing more from Harry and what he's up to with the Reshoring Initiative through Industrial Heating all throughout 2021. With that, Harry, tell us a little bit about you and the Reshoring Initiative.
Thank you, Eric. Thanks, Tom, for setting this up, and thanks to all the audience for being here. First, I'd like to play a little bit on what Eric said about it being Friday. About 45 years ago, I was leaving the factory with another guy. It was Friday afternoon at 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, something like that. And the guy next to me says, "Wow, thank God it's Friday." And I said, "Yeah, it's only 3 days till Monday and we can come back and work again." So that gives you a little insight into my view of life, so to speak. Work is very important. Getting things done is very important. Bringing manufacturing back to the U.S. is extremely important. So to give you a little more background, this is Singer Sewing Machine back in maybe 1910, 1920. And in its day, that was the biggest factory in the world, 2.6 million square feet, somewhere between 3,000 and 5,000 workers. And the two relevant pieces. First, my dad ran the heat treating department at Singer for about 20 years. And traveled around the world working on heat treating for Singer. Second, I drove past there 20 years ago and nothing of Singer was made there. Everything is imported. And that's when I decided that eventually I had to work to actually bring the manufacturing jobs back, because I saw how much had been lost there and in other companies and industries to which I sold machine tools, foundry equipment, all kinds of things like that. So I guess a little more relevance. I had one term in metallurgy before I switched to mechanical engineering, so I know something of what all of you do. So I think that's some good background.
All right. Well, thanks for that, Harry. I appreciate it. Thinking about our conversation this week, I wanted to really think about some of the questions we ask and how it'd be pertinent for everybody out there. And I think the first thing that jumped to my mind was, how much manufacturing did the U.S. lose to offshore?
Yeah, it's a good, important question. And some people don't care. Some economists just don't care at all. But the best measure of it is the 800 billion, that's 8 with a B, billion annual trade deficit, the amount by which our imports exceed our exports. And that number at current levels of U.S. productivity, that's 5 million manufacturing jobs. So we'd have 5 million more manufacturing jobs if we were neutral on trade, imports equal exports. The 5 million lost to offshoring is more than lost to automation, even though you read all these articles that say you're going to lose your job to the robots. That hasn't happened. So with balanced trade, which will be achieved mainly by importing less, manufacturing will be 40% larger. So think of all of you, think about your factories, your work, your heat treating facility, roughly 40% more volume when we balance the trade deficit.
Why did it happen?
You know, it's a long story. After World War II, the U.S. was dominant. Europe was all bombed out. Japan had been hit. For a period of time, we did 50% of the world's manufacturing. We were supplying stuff to everybody else because they couldn't make it anymore. And that's a huge trade surplus, gradually came down as everybody came back, and they came back with new factories, or our factories now were 20 years old. Okay, they came back with, in some ways, better practices. But so the trade surplus declined until it got to about 1980, and then it turned negative. And it continued, plummeted down since then as different countries, Mexico, Japan, Taiwan, Korea, eventually China, as they all became very competitive and pulled huge amounts of manufacturing out of the US. So the deficit grew up to this 800 billion per year, which is averaged since then, for the last 3, 4, 5 years. The main reasons, the overwhelming reason, the US is not price competitive. No matter what you hear from surveys from Deloitte and all these people, it says US is the most competitive country in the world. We're not. We're very unprice competitive. Typically, our FOB price is 20% higher than the other developed countries, Germany, Japan, people like that, and 40% higher than China's. Right? And the companies go where they can buy the product, a product of more or less acceptable quality at the lowest possible price. You know, as another understanding of that, we have a trade deficit with 9 of our top 10 trading partners. The only one we don't have it with is the UK, which is worse off than we are in this kind of productivity and cost sense. So it's not, the deficit is significantly with China, but far from being only with China. It's with Germany and almost every other developed country. And I attribute this to a lot of causes. First, the government certainly has a lot to do with it. We lack an industrial policy, a policy that would say that US manufacturing was important, that it should be enhanced, that it should be strengthened, or at least not allowed to decline. In fact, I say that we have a deindustrialization policy. So if you were going to pick a policy to undermine US manufacturing, to shrink it, well, let's see, the dollar went up 300% in the last 40 years. We have a poor basic education system, so the workers you get out of high school lack a lot of skills. We have a horrible process of recruiting and training skilled workforce. In fact, I've got a slide I wanted to show you. I hope this doesn't offend anybody out there with any PhDs in English literature in the industry, but I think there's at any given point in time, 30 to 40% of the people who have university degrees of all ages are in jobs that do not require a university degree. And at the same time, we have shortages, severe shortages of people like tool makers, welders, and specialists in heat treating. The corporate tax rates were way too high. They're better now, could still be lower. Regulations have driven a lot of work offshore. I suspect some in your industry. We should have had a value-added tax, which would have applied taxes to the product coming in from offshore. There's a lot of debate whether it's a good idea or not, but all the other countries do it and it's done well for them. Our healthcare costs are substantially higher than in other countries, and they're borne by the employer, which drives up the manufacturing cost of the employer in comparison to those other countries. The government, the society, basically didn't care about the trade deficit. All these reasons. Companies bear a lot of responsibility. Short-sighted management, MBAs preaching that manufacturing is not core competence, that marketing, sure, finance, yeah, mergers and acquisitions, this kind of manufacturing, let's send that off to China. Let's get that done over there. Companies have underinvested. If you compare us to our major competitors, the South Koreans have 3 times as many robots per 1,000 manufacturing workers as we do. The Chinese invest 3 times as much in CNC machine tools as we do. In Germany, very, very tough competitor, their average machine tool is, I think, 6 years old, and ours is 9 or 10. Significant differences in productivity. We allowed quality to lapse. There was a time, maybe 30, 40 years ago, when our quality just wasn't up there with Germany and Japan's. It's come back some, but we lost a lot. Workers have something to do with this too. On the average, they don't work as smart as the Germans. I visited a Swiss major machine tool maker, and they said when they're designing the CNC program for a complicated part, and if it's for Germany or Switzerland, they do it in one setup, whereas if they do it for the US, they did it in 2 setups because our people were not sophisticated enough on average to take advantage of the more complex but more productive way of doing it. We don't work as hard on average as the Chinese. I repeatedly read stories of Foxconn with their 250,000 employee factory, and when Apple says you got to get me 10 million of those things tomorrow, they ring the bell, they wake them up in the dormitory, and the workers are out there working with a cup of tea, and they're putting the things together. You can imagine how far you'd get trying to do that with the US workforce. I'm not saying this is a good practice, but it shows you what we're competing with. Consumers, always demanding the lowest price, or almost always demanding the lowest price, and companies respond, they go out and find the lowest price. So everybody has a piece of this, and everybody has to contribute to bring it back.
Well, what sign is there of work coming back?
Yeah, fortunately, some pretty good signs, and for some good reasons too. This slide shows the trend in unit labor costs. So the cost in dollars, labor cost only, of making a manufactured product in various countries. And so the US is the red line down here. This goes from 2000 to 2020. And each year, in the year 2000, whatever that dollar cost was, and it was different in every country, call it 100, and then index it going forward for the change in the percentage change in the wage rate, the change in productivity, and the change in the currency relative to the dollar. So we see what's happening over the time period. US stays constant. You can see nice flat red line. Other countries bounce around. Here's China way up here. So Chinese labor costs per unit of output per thing expressed in dollars is about 5 times as high as it was in the year 2000. Now, it was really small in the year 2000, but it's gotten big enough that even before the trade war, even before COVID, work was starting to flow out of China because China was no longer competitive. And then when the work flows, when it starts to move, that's when then there's an opportunity for us to grab some of it and bring it back here. So we have been doing that. And so this chart shows the annual rate of reshoring done by US companies, think General Motors, that's in blue, and FDI, foreign direct investment, so think foreign companies like maybe Toyota. And back in 2010, when we were founded, the sum of those was about 6,000 jobs per year. It peaked at about 190,000 in 2017, driven significantly by the cut in the corporate tax rate, regulations, more business-friendly environment. And then it fell off in 2018 and 2019, probably driven by the trade war and the uncertainty of what the tariffs were going to be on what products, on what countries, for how long. And so it fell off and has started to pick up a little bit in 2020, despite the COVID crisis. So yeah, okay, let's go back to that one. Go ahead.
Well, as you go through this and show these things, I'm just curious, what tools does the Reshoring Initiative offer to accelerate these trends?
Okay, the first, mainly TCO, total cost of ownership. So I talked about price before. The US is not price competitive, and companies look at that. It turns out you've had, all of you in the audience have had this experience. You go in, you quote, and you know your heat treatment is better than somebody else's, but you're told your prices is too high, and the buyer's going to buy on price. And So we offer the TCO, Total Cost of Ownership Estimator, which helps the buyer start with the FOB price, in other words, the at the factory door price, and add in duty, freight, packaging, carrying cost of inventory, travel cost, the risk of stocking out, the benefit of having engineering near manufacturing, all these kinds of things, and and by doing so, typically 15 or 20% of extra cost is attributed to offshore and helps to close that gap. The TCO estimator is on our website. It's free to use. You sign up, you sign in, you use it. That's fine. We bless you. You call me, email me, ask for help. Some of you may know Deming, who was the guru of quality, got that going in the U.S. And he said, stop buying on the basis of price, instead minimize total cost. Jim Womack, who's probably the current guru of lean, and my neighbor up here in Maine, he talks about lean shoring. He talks about do the math, and then when you bring the work back, bring it back smarter, more lean, more automated, better employee engagement. So these are some of the costs that get included: freight, regular duties, travel costs to go see the supplier, the benefit of being able to deliver just in time. Those are what I call hard costs. Then there's risks and strategic impacts, like the risk of emergency air freight happens all the time. The benefit of having engineering and manufacturing in the same country, ideally pretty close to each other, can talk the same language, can get together, same time zone, and resolve problems and optimize. The benefit of having a Made in USA label, increasingly with the, especially since COVID, the American consumer is seeking and willing to pay a little more for the Made in USA product. The risk of stocking out, the IP risk, it's got to be higher with a factory over there where the data has to be stored on Chinese servers, for example, the quality differential. So all these things suggest that there's benefits to bring it back. As to sort of quantify all that, the blue line here shows the ratio of the Chinese price to the US price for the first 180 cases of China versus the US of people using our TCO estimator. And so you can see the 100% line, with the vertical line, is where China price equals US. To the right, US price is lower. To the left, Chinese price is lower. The peak here is around 70. And only about 8% of the work does the US have a price advantage. But when you switch to total cost, the peak moves over to 80 something, and 32% of the work is to the right of the 100 line, in other words, where the US price is lower. And if there happens to be a 15% Trump tariff on it, goes up to 46%. So huge difference in the amount of work that can be brought back depending on how the company does the measurement. And so the TCO estimator is designed to help companies do that. Here's my favorite case of that. This company, Mori Corp, produces printed circuit boards and makes things with those circuit boards. And they came to me 4 or 5 years ago. They were about to lose a good customer to China. China came through with a lower price. And so the VP of sales, Tony, and I did the TCO estimator calculation from the perspective of the customer. Tony took it in to the customer, showed him, and he credits that with saving a $60 million order, just by helping the customer use the correct metric in comparing his offer to the Chinese. So TCO is the key tool, but then we offer methods to use the tool. So for example, for a company that makes widgets, whatever they are, we can tell them who the biggest importers of widgets are, what tonnage they're bringing in, and then the company uses the TCO estimator to convince them to buy, that importer to buy from them instead of continuing to import. We have similar programs to identify the biggest supply chain gaps. So if I'd been smarter a year ago, I'd have said caps or masks and gowns and gloves and penicillin and ventilators, and I'd have had people making those a year or two ago to be ready for the price. But now we have the methodology to do that. We have a similar method to help big companies reevaluate their purchases and decide to produce more here and source more here. So we've got a whole variety of things to help the industry and specifically to help manufacturers such as yourselves.
All right, well, that's great to hear. A lot of great resources and tools. I love the data as well. What should OEMs do?
Yeah, so first, if I visit an OEM, they say, Harry, what should we do? I say, well, I'm not here to tell you to reshore. I'm here to ask you to reevaluate. Because I know you're not going to reshore unless it's in more or less in your own self-interest. So I ask, in your own self-interest, reevaluate to find out if there are some parts, some products that it's going to be more profitable to you to bring back, the ones that are on that curve to the right of the 100% line. And almost every company will have some. And to do that, again, in your own self-interest, but also considering some responsibility to the community, to your stakeholders, your employees, the country. You do the math, see what you come up with. And once you've done the math, then reshore what makes sense. If it's close, then apply lean, apply automation, skilled workforce training, to get that final 5% in. But if you have a 20, 30% price gap, you're never even going to try to make it happen. So you got to start with a TCO. We suggest 4 priorities for companies. First thing, do not send anything new offshore without doing the math, without doing the TCO. Because once you get it off there and it gets all tooled up there and it's passed all the tests, it's harder to bring it back than it is not to send it away. That's the first thing. Second thing would be what you've outsourced offshore to bring back, because that's a lot easier than pulling work out of your own factory offshore. Third, let's say you have a factory offshore and it's shipping 50% into Asia, 50% back to the US. Well, over 5 years, repurpose it so that it's 80 or 90% into Asia, and then do your incremental investments and your incremental purchasing back here in the US to meet more of the US demand. And the toughest thing is for me to tell you to shut down your $10 million factory offshore and come back here and build a $15 million factory. That's a pretty tough sell. So that's fourth. That's an unlikely thing to happen. If I'm at a company, or if you're at a company trying to sell to them, or if it's within your own company, look into pain. So I ask, tell me about products where you have delivery issues, where qualities, where you've had warranty problems, where there's an intellectual property risk, where people are staying up to midnight to make a call to Asia to resolve a problem. And in contrast, if you had a local supplier, you'd be doing it at 10 o'clock in the morning, and it would be easy. So you look into all these issues where there's pain, because if you can find the pain points, then you can get the quality department, the inventory control, marketing and sales, other people to help you, because often procurement is the barrier. Procurement often is siloed. They're measured by buying at the lowest price instead of buying at the lowest total cost. So you need to get a team in that company to help you win this battle. Invest in automation, lean, skilled workforce training as needed to close the gaps.
Okay, well, being that we're at an MTI event, I think the big question out there is, what can MTI members do?
Yeah, that's a good question. First, it's not as easy as it would be for a foundry or a machine shop, because those are like the highest tier, maybe supplying the product to the end customer, whereas you tend to have a smaller percentage of the total cost of the product, and therefore not quite as much influence. And you're typically not selling to the company that makes a decision about reshoring. Nevertheless, there are some things you could do. First, for the captive heat treaters, I'm assuming we've got some out there, take the message to management. So to the extent that you can take this message, take our website to management and convince them to bring some of the work back, let us help you if needed, then you're going to be busier, and that's what you want. The company will be better. For the international heat treaters, the methodologies that we show, the logic, the economics of it, works just as well for Canada and for Mexico and Germany and Japan as it does for the United States. So for the internationals, apply it to your situation. For the commercial heat treaters, first thought was identify processes that have been lost, maybe due to regulations, for example. Yeah, sometimes when the process was no longer being done here, the product went offshore with the process. They went to some other country where you could still do it. If you can find some of those, and if you can figure out a way to make that product here economically, either without the process or with it, then work to bring it back. The people making the product, many cases, will be delighted. We have a reshoring library. It has over 3,000 cases of reshoring, specific companies that have brought back specific products to the United States. So you could go on that. There's a section called advanced search, and you can search by industry, for example, automotive, state, where you're located, for example, and even search in a search box, put in specific products that you're really good at. And the system will pull up all the cases we know of. It'll name the companies, contact them, tell them how good you are. Now, if you're trying to think of a good customer base to sell to, would you rather be selling to a company that's in the process of offshoring, which means you're eventually going to lose the work, or to one that's in the process of reshoring, which means your work with them is likely to grow and be more stable over time? Another item within this would be, for most US companies do not sell aggressively enough to foreign direct investment factories. I see Toyota and others like that building factories here and often bring in their foreign suppliers from their home country who build supply chain right around them, where US companies could have gotten that business in some cases. So I'd go aggressively after that FDI work. Here's a list of the top industries that have reshored and how many jobs have come back in each. And I highlighted in red the industries that are relatively heat treating intensive, transportation equipment, appliances, machinery, medical equipment, fabricated metal products, lots of heat treating, lots of hardening going on in these product areas, and they tend to be some of the strongest areas. You can also promote that you are interested in participating in reshoring. So here's an example of a plastic injection molder outside Philadelphia. And on their website, they talk about why reshoring is a good thing for the customer, how to do the analysis. They mention us, you don't have to, but they're in there pitching to help the customer see this. And the more you pitch, the more likely you are to win. We work a lot with groups like MEPs, Manufacturing Extension Partnerships. There's one in every state. Whatever state you're in, there's a Manufacturing Extension Partnership. And their job is to help companies like yours succeed. And many of them are now promoting reshoring and helping companies reshore. So you could go to them and to the economic developers in your area and say, hey, we're interested in reshoring. If you've got a project and it might involve some heat treating, we'd be happy to quote, we'd be happy to participate, we'd be happy to take a look and see if we can help make that happen. Why? Because then you're going to get some work. So those are some ideas for you. It's never easy. If we're easy, I wouldn't have a job. but give it a shot, and I'm here to help you and help you and help the country. Yeah.
Well, we talked about members. We've talked about, what about the U.S. governments? What are they doing?
Yeah, U.S. government, I think, is the most at fault. I took the, I mentioned industrial policy area before, things like the U.S. dollar, should be much more investment in skilled workforce and apprenticeship programs. President Trump's done some good things in the area, but nobody has done enough. The country should pick some essential industries like semiconductors and pharmaceuticals, things that everybody can get behind, and I'm sure that's going to happen. But mainly, we should not be picking the industries. We should be leveling the playing field, getting the dollar down, having a good skilled workforce, maybe having a value-added tax, but getting a level playing field so that the marketplace will then make the decision to bring the work back and balance the trade deficit and get that 40% increase. As we as we do that, I see a virtuous cycle happening. So in this, as reshoring happens, well, then your capacity utilization goes up. And for companies, when capacity utilization gets above about 80%, they invest. And when you invest, you buy the newest, best, most automated system to get the job done. And when you do that, you become more competitive. And when you become more competitive, you can reshore more. So as I see the job, the most important job of the government is to get the US competitive enough so that you get busy enough so that we go into this virtuous cycle and then more reshoring happens. And over 30 years, we bring the 5 million jobs back.
5 million, looking forward to it. Anything else you'd like to add, Harry, before we get into some questions?
Yeah, so I'd like to, we track reshoring. One way we make it credible is to know the actual cases, to know the hundreds of thousands of cases that have actually happened. So if you're involved in any reshoring, if you, not that you made the decision, but your customer's customer made the decision, we'd like to hear about it. And when you let us hear about it, we'd like to do an article on it for industrial heating to report on your successes and make you even more famous and visible in the industry. So I'm hoping you'll tell us. And when you have an opportunity, when somebody comes to you and says, there's a small chance that somebody's going to reshore and we're going to get some work, then say, oh, have you given them the TCO estimator? Have you called Harry? Have you read some articles about this? Well, I'm here. So this is all of our contact information, phone number, email, website, links to the various things that I described. So I'm hoping you'll get in touch and we'll work together, and it'll be a better, stronger industry for all of us.
That's great. Thank you, Harry. Well, we've got a couple questions coming in. We're getting limited on time, so we're going to do our best to get to a couple of these. Here's one for you, Harry. How about the skilled workforce availability?
Yeah, the U.S. has, as I mentioned, has done a weak job of recruiting and training. Most of the smartest kids went on to university. There is a very strong trend now towards more apprenticeship programs, community colleges, certificates of manufacturing. One of the reasons that it's in all of our interest to promote that reshoring is happening is that a lot of the kids and the guidance counselors said no for manufacturing careers because they thought all the work was going to keep going offshore. So why get trained on something when there aren't going to be any jobs? So to the extent that you report your successes, that all of your community reports its successes, then get the local media to report the reshoring successes in Cleveland, in Ohio, in Michigan, what have you. Then the guidance council will say, yes, Susie, heat treating, great industry, great field, go back, manufacturing is the place again.
Okay, we've got another question here. What has been the impact of productivity on reshoring?
Many of the companies that come back do invest in more automation because you have to offset the higher wages here than offshore. But despite the best efforts that people have made, U.S. productivity in manufacturing has only grown 0.4% per year for the last 12 years. And in contrast, China's grown its at 6 or 7% per year. So in the long run, you lose if it's that difference. And so we need to up our game, grow productivity 2, 3, 4% per year. But we can do that and draw down the 5 million jobs that are now offshore. And so we can have increases in productivity, increases in wages, and more manufacturing jobs.
All right, thank you, Harry. Another one, what is the role of lean?
Oh, lean. Like I mentioned, Jim Womack, sort of the guru of lean, talks about lean shoring. And he says, when you bring it back, don't bring it back the way you made it and lost it 20 years ago. Bring it back much smarter. Bring it back with lean principles, with automation, with skilled workforce, And if you do that, it will succeed. And if you don't, if you try and if you bring it back, put it in the same factory with the same equipment, then someone's going to come by in a year or two and say, no, send it off to China again. So bring it back lean.
All right. How can a company get started?
Well, we have a, if you look on my slide here, TCO webinar. So the TCO webinar is free online, and it's a 1-hour webinar that says how to use TCO. So I would, and it takes through, more or less what we've done here, but in much more emphasis on the actual using of the TCO estimator. So I'd encourage you to listen to that, and then if it's interesting, try it. And if you have problems, if you need help, then you email me and I help you.
Okay. We'll get to just one last question, but it's important. If anybody has questions, who should they call?
Right here.
Okay.
Yep. Right here.
All right. Very good.
Do it. Yeah.
That's great. Well, thank you everybody for attending today's live session. We appreciate it. I'd like to thank all of our sponsors at FNA: Super Systems, Surface Combustion, Gasberry, McLaughlin, Roman Manufacturing, Honeywell, ECM, and Seco Vacuum. Don't forget today at 3:15 to make sure you log in to hear Tom Morrison and Jim Oakes kind of wrap up this year's virtual FNA events. And also, I believe there's some golden tickets that are going to be handed out to some attendees. We appreciate everybody for attending today and attending a great live session with Harry. Thank you again, Harry, and look forward to hearing more from you through Industrial next year. So again, thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Eric and Tom.